Hello, welcome back to another episode. Foundations of Freedom, Green Dragon Podcast. We're back another week, another installment of my favorite episodes where I get to talk a little history with y'all. These are good, and I was actually really excited about this one. I've spent the last I think we spent about 3 weeks preparing for this one. I even bought a book and read it, which is unlike, I shouldn't say I read it. I've been reading it. Um, Read it would imply I finished it, which I have not. But for me to prepare for a podcast with some actual physical literature is a little unheard of. Usually includes a lot of online research and listening to other podcasts in preparation for this because I definitely do better preparing for podcasts when I hear things. Which we did listen to a podcast in preparation for this podcast. Um, that podcast is called, let me pull it up here. I have the name. I don't have it off the top of my head. The American History Hit Podcast. And this particular one was the Battle of the Alamo. It was pretty good. It wasn't that long. If you guys I haven't listened to many more of these podcasts. I did listen to one today called The Origins of the Civil War. They actually just posted that today. And I was on a walk at work and it just started playing because the last one I listened to was from that podcast. And it was also very interesting. So yeah, shout out to the American History Hit Podcast. They're pretty easy, digestible episodes. Like I think the one we listened to for this one was like 35 minutes. They've got some interesting, they usually bring in an expert. They've got some interesting stuff. It's quick, it's easy, it's simple. It's pretty good. And they have everything. They have a prohibition one. They have one on the Amish I saw. So pretty interesting podcast. Shout out to them. They're doing some pretty cool stuff. Just wanted to put that out there. That's one of the sources we used. And then the book I read, this infamous book that I'm gonna get through this because it's a good book. It's called Sam Houston and the Alamo Avengers by Brian Kilmeade. Highly recommend this book. We were talking about it before the podcast. And it's excellent. Being completely unaware of American history, apparently, did not know there was a man named Sam Houston, which the great city of Houston is named after. It's a pretty good book. It's pretty interesting. I did not know. I guess I'd heard the name Sam Houston before. I'd never put two and two together. Andrew Jackson's protege. Obviously, he settled the area that is now Houston, Texas. He was given a bunch of land out there, and pretty interesting guy overall. So we'll talk a little bit about him today. But the main topic for today's show is obviously the Battle of the Alamo. This is an interesting event because the event itself did not even happen at that time or in America at that time. I mean, now America, the city of San Antonio, but at that time this was smack dab in the middle of Mexico. And so it's a little bit funny. It's a little bit funny to think about something that seems so like such an American moment, but actually was part of a revolution the Texas Revolution, which was Texas breaking free from Mexico. So it's kind of wild. It's kind of wild to think that okay, this isn't actually like this has a lot more to do with sort of Mexican history and Texas heritage than it does actually sort of American history. Obviously, it's important in American history because now Texas is the greatest state in America. But technically, this is the story of the beginning of Texas's freedom from Mexico. So pretty interesting to think about there. This is probably the most pivotal moment in the Texas Revolution, I think. And this particular conflict is probably for such a short revolution because the Texas Revolution was really less than a year, which is crazy to think about. So they fought for less than a year, but this battle had to be one of the longer battles in probably North American history, with it spanning from February 23rd, 1836 to March 6th, 1836. So that's a pretty long battle for such a short, war and revolution that was successful. So the Alamo, as you can see by this is the Alamo, our lovely backdrops. If you're watching this on YouTube, which you're probably not, but we have the infamous. I think this is the chapel behind us, if I'm not mistaken, Jake. That's right. But
Correct.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
So this
kind of
is
what everybody thinks of when you hear the Alamo. That's at least myself.
right.
That's the visual that I get.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I think the chapel was built in the mid seven was it mid 1700s, I think,
Yeah, I
somewhere
know
around there.
it was old even at that point. Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean the Alamo mission, um, obviously has been around even longer than that. The Alamo mission was a historic Spanish mission, then started out as a mission to populate what at the time was the Spanish owned territory of, I think they called it Tejas. It was spelled like Tejas or something like that, something dumb. Because
Yeah.
Spanish owned it. Texas is way better.
Yeah.
Tejas is a little, I don't know, it seems a little fruity. Um, but it was founded, so it was founded, obviously so it started out as basically a way to colonize the area in this region. And it was super important. The location of the Alamo, which is modern day San Antonio, and actually if you've been to San Antonio, you already know this, but San Antonio is located on some pretty important waterways in Texas. And those waterways are still there today. And the reason the Alamo is such an important place is because it was like built right on these waterways. So when the Spanish first got there, they were like, yeah, this place is probably pretty good for us to, build a mission, and for there to be some viability for people to actually be able to stay here and colonize here. So that's why they built the mission where they built it. And I think that would have been, shoot, I think I want to say I heard this number floated out there. I could be wrong on this. I think this is around like 1680. So a while back. Um, so it's been there quite a while. I could be wrong on that date. So if I'm incorrect on that, I'm sorry, but I think I heard that in the podcast. I could be wrong. Anyways, it was important. Obviously started out as a mission, and then it became a fort. As it became, as it grew. By the time 1836 rolls around, I mean, this is uh, the town is kind of spread out behind the fort, but the fort itself is there to protect the town, and the fort or the mission itself is about a 4-acre compound, so it's pretty large. And a little bit later, as we get closer to the battle, maybe we could take a look, Jake, at that diagram that you showed us before the podcast. But overall, pretty impressive. Obviously, this changes hands a little when the Spanish then lose grasp of Mexico, and Mexico gains its independence. And when Mexico gains its independence, obviously this becomes the Texas becomes the northern territory of of uh, of Mexico. So it's a pretty interesting historic place right from the get-go. Obviously, there was also Native American or Native Texan. Technically, they're not Native Americans. I don't know what they
Mm.
are. I don't know how you classify that. Native
Native
Mexican?
Tehans?
Oh, Tejanos. That's what they called them.
Tejanos?
Is that what they called them, Jake? I'm speaking completely out
Sounds
of
about
pocket.
right.
I'm completely out of pocket here.
Yeah, I never really thought about that before, but
They
that
said
is
it
kind
in
of
the
a
podcast. I
they
forget what
did.
they call it.
Yeah.
I think it was the
He
Tejanos.
said like, yeah.
And I think what he said is actually those people or those natives actually combined with because when the Spanish settlers got there, right, the mission was built actually so that the Spanish settlers also obviously brought Catholicism and they converted all the neighboring, basically anybody that was kind of the Spanish MO. They just show up and start converting natives. Um, from my understanding, the people that then, so the natives who then obviously intermingled and kind of married Spanish there became what is considered today as like modern Mexicans. From at least from what the podcast said, at least that area, like that northern region. Um, so that was kind of interesting. But yeah, that's a little bit of background on the Alamo here. Obviously, a pretty important place because of its geographic location. It ended up being the crossroads actually for all the major highways, all the six major highways that ran through that region of the Texas territory. So when Mexico did sort of inherit that, I guess, or gained its independence, it became a fairly important trade route. Um, for a long time, the Texas territory, and this is the allure of moving to the Texas territory that we chatted a little bit about with like Davy Crockett and who did we chat about last time? Why is it completely Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone?
Um,
Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah.
Daniel
Yeah.
Boone. Both of those guys, obviously. No, not Daniel Boone.
Wait a minute.
No,
Yeah. I think it was just Davy Crockett, right?
Davy Crockett or somebody else. Who's the other guy that fought in the Alamo, guys? Why is this
Bowie? Jim Bowie?
Jim Bowie? Yes, he was
And
another one.
Travis? Travis?
Travis was there. Yes. There was somebody else, wasn't there? Maybe I'm completely off.
I feel like those are the main
No,
three,
those are the main
but
three. You're right.
there could be someone else.
It was Bowie and Crockett for sure. One of the things with both of those guys is they moved to Texas basically to get land, to inherit land. And I mean, you buy land, I should say, not inherit it. But the land was so much cheaper because I think at that time to buy an acre of land in the US, it was they had hiked their prices up. It was like $1 or something per acre, of course. You know, the American government was getting a little too greedy and they jacked up their prices to like $1, $1.25 an acre or something like that. But you could go to Texas and buy an acre for 25 cents. So there was a lot of influx of these American frontiersmen that went to Texas because of the cheap land and all this opportunity. So a lot of them, like Sam Austin too, he moved to Texas. All these guys were in Texas because of the prospect of land and opportunity essentially. So there's this influx of Americans that are settling this area, and then you have the native Texans. And so it's kind of this a little bit of a melting pot of people in a lot of these like mission areas and these mission towns, but it offered a lot of opportunity for land. So this is a little bit where I want to talk about Sam Houston and Andrew Jackson. So Sam Houston's a pretty interesting character. He fought under Andrew Jackson in the Creek War that we talked about in the Davy Crockett podcast, right? We talked about
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I know we knew absolutely nothing about the Creek War in the Davy Crockett podcast, but it turns out it's a pretty important war. At least if you're Sam Houston and Andrew Jackson. Um, so Sam Houston fights under Andrew Jackson in this war. He actually gets injured during one of these battles, takes an arrow to the leg, and he's out of commission. So he kind of goes. The war kind of gets finished off. and he goes and he takes a bit of a rest and a reprieve, and he turns into a little bit of a drunk, and he kind of seemed like somebody that was a little bit in his own kind of getting a little depressed out there, just kind of drinking a lot. And at the time, Andrew Jackson's making his way up through the ranks. He goes from General Jackson, and then he becomes senator, and then he becomes president. But when he becomes president, he makes it his personal mission to investigate taking back the Texas territory, because this is something I actually didn't know, but Texas was sort of lost by America, because in 1803, when Thomas Jefferson signed the Louisiana Territory Purchase, he thought that the Texas territory was part of the deal. But in negotiating with Spain, so I guess John Quincy Adams somehow was in charge of negotiating with Spain, which, first of all, who let John Quincy Adams do anything? John Quincy Adams was in charge of negotiating with Spain, and he lost the Texas territory to Spain, and Spain kept the Texas territory, obviously, as we've discussed. And Andrew Jackson quite literally never forgave Adams for this. And to put it simply, Jackson absolutely despised Adams. From my understanding, he thought Adams was a complete idiot. And so this only, added to his despise for Adams. But Jackson did make it his personal mission to regain the Texas territory one day. So when Jackson becomes president, he hits up Houston, who's kind of his protege at this point. And he tried to help Houston get into politics and all these things. It didn't really work out. Houston kind of just seemed like he wanted to be a drunk at this point. He didn't seem to have a whole lot of ambition going for him. And so he hits up Houston when he becomes president. He says, "Hey, listen," he's like, "what do you think about this Texas territory?" And he's like, and he basically says, without saying it, he says, "Here's $500," because Houston didn't have like a freaking penny to his name. He owed all these debts. And he's like, I think he owed actual debts to the US government. He says, Houston, here's $500. Basically, he says, I want you to take these $500. And he said, I want you to go to Texas. And he says, I want you to basically feel out the situation in Texas. Basically saying, he's like, if you want to get the Texans on our side and bring them back to us, he's like, let's essentially steal Texas from Mexico. Jackson was completely out of pocket. Jackson was basically using Sam Houston as a covert operative, sending him down to Texas to start a revolution to take back Texas, because he thought that Texas was rightfully ours because we lost it in 1803 when Quincy Adams effed everything up. So that's a little bit of background on why Houston then goes to Texas, and Houston goes down and he meets Austin, and they actually give him a large plot of land, which I forget how many acres he actually gets, but it ends up being the area right on the coast where Houston is today. But it's quite a bit of land, and obviously he settles that. But that he kind of kickstarts at least I don't know if he kickstarts the idea of a revolution there, but I think to a certain extent he starts planting the seed, at least in guys like Austin's head, that it's time for Texas to be independent from Mexico. Because at this time, kind of pivoting a little bit here, I used the fancy word pivot. Santa Anna is in charge in Mexico. Now, Santa Anna is an interesting character. So Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, pretty central figure in Mexican politics during the 19th century. And he plays a pretty crucial role in the nation's history. And his I don't know if I would say Santa Anna's, legacy is very much liked. I think it depends on who you're talking to. But most people don't like Santa Anna in Mexico, at least from my understanding. So Santa Anna initially gained prominence as a military officer, and he distinguished himself during the Mexican War of Independence against Spain, 1810 through 1821. He earned the rank of the general. After Mexico gained independence in 1821, country faced all sorts of political instability. And that's kind of when Santa Anna pivots into politics. Now, it's important to note that Santa Anna, he fought on the side of Mexico gaining independence from Spain, and in doing so, he was, fighting for the Republic of Mexico, right? Well, of course, as soon as Santa Anna gets a little bit of taste in politics, he forgets all about that, all about the people he fought for, and this, the Republic of the People, and he's supposed to be, on the people's side, and he starts like gobbling up power. He starts getting a little power hungry, and so he goes from this person that was fighting for the Republic, the people's rights, and then all of a sudden he swings complete opposite end of the pendulum, and he's turns into this, centralist, basically dictator, because one of the issues in the Republic of Mexico in that 1810 to 1821, that time frame, they had 20 presidents in 12 years.
Well,
So imagine when I say political instability, where you have basically two presidents a year, that doesn't lead to a lot getting done. It wasn't very efficient. I mean, in 12 years, I think in American history, I think we had maybe at that point in time, I think if you take the 1810 to 1821 years, I think we literally had like three presidents. So when you put that into perspective, you're like, oh, yeah, that seems like it might be difficult. So he takes advantage of this a little bit, and he uses this to gain control. Basically, he was in control of the military already as general, and then he takes over on the political side, and he becomes president of Mexico in 1833 for the first time, I think. And yeah, he's not very well liked. Let's just put it that way. Because he comes in, and as soon as he comes into power, um, he, like I said, he changed basically flip-flopped his political ideology. Initially, he supported federalism, and then he shifted basically complete opposite to centralism, favoring a strong central government instead of the state's autonomy and the people's autonomy. So one of the things he does when he comes into power is he took away the people's rights for autonomy, obviously, but he he gets rid of the Mexican Constitution that was installed in 1824. He gets rid of that. He throws that away, and then he decides it's a great idea to say, yeah, so all the military is now going to be centralized under me, the president, and all the government's going to be centralized under me, the president, and we're going to need everybody to basically turn in their guns. And we're going to need to, all these like little militias in the territories and states are going to have to be consolidated. So places like the Alamo that have been these, military kind of sort of militia outposts, sort of, so to speak, these military outposts are basically going to get combined under my command. Interesting guy, obviously. This isn't very well liked. So he's already not a fan. Like the Mexican people aren't a fan of him, but the people of Texas really aren't a fan of him. So the Tejanos or whatever we decided to call the Texas settlers, they're really not a fan of him. And then mix that with some of these Americans that have moved to Texas, they're really not a fan of that. So obviously, tensions between the Texan settlers and Mexican authorities are really coming to a head here. And so this was what takes us into the Texas Revolution. It's important to note that the Texas Revolution was not the only revolution this time. There were other territories in Mexico that tried to have revolutions, but none of them were successful. The only successful revolution at this time, which was basically the Federalist supporters in Mexico, and then there was the Centralists. And essentially, Santa Anna put a kibosh to all the Federalists there, except this, obviously this territory, which was Texas. So this gives a little bit of background to the tensions rising before the Alamo, because I think it's important to understand that a little bit, because it is a little bit complicated. So yeah, like I said, you've got that conflict brewing. There was also some disputes, from my understanding, over issues like slavery too. Immigration restrictions turned into a big thing because Mexico had that basically an open border policy, and they were coming across and Americans were buying land. But they actually shut that border immigration or that immigration down, and they said, yeah, no more immigrants. Because I think what Santa Anna realized is actually, if we keep letting Americans in, it's just gonna eventually become another American, colony, American territory. So he kind of recognized that. So he's like, we got to put a kibosh to this. Interesting enough, Sam Houston actually came to Mexico or the Texas territory after that was put in place, but he had good enough connections with Austin that Austin hooked him up with his land. So it didn't stop people, but it was going on. Obviously, so you had the slavery issues, immigration issues, the want for the local autonomy, because obviously, like, Texas was like pretty far north.
And they were paying settlers, correct, to bring in more settlers. I know Stephen F. Austin was one of them. I forget what the term was. There was a certain term for the people that they basically hire to bring in more immigrants to Texas or Mexico at the time.
Yeah, and Mexico is doing it just basically so they were doing it for a while because they wanted people to settle the territory. And that's why they're bringing in people that's why basically, I mean, land was free for the most part, and you could go to Texas and get as much land as you wanted to without too much of a problem. And then after a while, I think they realized their mistake. They just let a bunch of Americans into this territory. And then you had Andrew Jackson sitting over there in Washington. He's like, if we just keep pushing people in there, I'll take Texas back.
They didn't realize how powerful his personal vendetta was against John Quincy Adams.
Yeah.
They underestimated him.
Jackson really hated he had like this next level hatred for Quincy Adams. He just despised the man.
That is funny. I mean, I'm sure there were other reasons, but that was one of them for
he's like
the big territory.
He's
like
that freaking idiot lost Texas. He's like it was ours and he freaking lost it.
Just
You done messed up,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it is funny. But yeah, it seems like the new Santa Anna Constitution of 1835 was really like, it was the culmination. It was kind of like the bursting point for all this frustration with the Texans and with a lot of the other territories in Mexico. So no, it's very interesting to think about it too, because like I'm still trying to put my head around a little bit the fact that like this still isn't technically American history. Technically, it's a revolution they fought against Mexico.
Yeah. Like no one was thinking about it joining the states at that point in time.
No, exactly. They were they just wanted their sovereignty, and it's pretty interesting. And then I mean, obviously we'll get to it later, but Texas becomes like a sovereign nation, and for like 10 years or so.
10 to 15, something
Yeah,
like
10 to
that.
15
Yeah.
years. And Sam
Yeah.
Houston becomes their president. He's their president, it's their first and third president. So
Mhm.
it's really, you forget about that. That's actually something that isn't talked a lot about unless you're like in Texas and learn Texas history. Um, it's pretty interesting. And you wonder, it's kind of funny that we're talking about this topic now because right now Texas is looking like they might turn into their own little sovereign
Probably
nation.
as close as they've been since then, since those 10 or 15 years. This
Yeah,
is
I
probably
know.
the closest they've gotten.
I know we joke, like I've joked about it in the past, like, oh yeah, Texas leaves the US, but like they're pretty darn close to it. Actually, funny enough, I don't know if you guys saw, this is sidebar here, because we're gonna get into this in a second, but that come and take it cannon flag, that they are flying right now, basically saying F you to the government,
Mhm.
because you're not protecting us anymore. You're not protecting our border. They that all originated. So this leads in perfectly. It all originated from the Battle of Gonzales, where so Santa Anna puts out this decree, basically like, okay, you're going to give up your guns, we're going to consolidate them, and so they, there's this general that goes out with some Mexican troops. They go to the city of Gonzales in 1835. This is actually considered, I think, the first battle in the Texas Revolution. Um, they show up in Gonzales to take these cannons, and famously, they say, they're the come and take it cannons. And the Mexican army shows up, and the Mexican army and the commander was told, whatever you do, don't start a revolution. So they were instructed not to fight. So they show up, they're like, give us your cannons. The Texans are like, no, blah, blah, blah. There's like a little skirmish. But the Mexican army then leaves and goes back, and the Texans are like, look at that, we won. They're like, we did it, guys.
That was easy.
That was easy. But it turns out, they yeah, they hadn't won yet. But that's where the come and take it cannon flag comes from. It comes from that. So that if you see the
Okay.
come and take it cannon, that originates from the Mexicans trying to seize the two cannons in Gonzales. So that begins the hostilities. That's kind of like the first official conflict in the Texas Revolution. So that's pretty interesting. That then pretty much kind of leads into basically the Mexican army leaves, and the Texans are okay. They're probably going to come back in the spring and try to do it again. Turns out they were a little wrong on the timing, because Santa Anna then basically, as soon as this happens, gathers together a pretty sizable force and decides, we're going to go up into Texas. So the Texas territory. So they march. He takes his army. They march, which is, from what the podcast described, a pretty grueling march. They actually march through a blizzard. They march through a mountain range. A lot of the soldiers die in the way. One of the things mentioned was that a lot of the soldiers like brought their families with them on this march from the Mexican army. A lot of their families die on this march, but nevertheless, they end up in right outside the Alamo in February. So just a few months, basically a few months later, and about 2.5, 3 months early, or than the Texans expected, with this pretty sizable force. So that's kind of what sets the stage for the Alamo. So yeah, this is the culmination, the lead up to the Alamo here. I think Jake maybe will pull up that diagram of the actual mission and the fortress. But just to put this in perspective, when when Santa Anna first shows up on February 23rd, I think at this point there is only the men that were left over from kind of the battle in the town. Um, so there's only like 100, I think like 50 odd men in the mission at this point. Um, Something around there. Obviously, there's some pretty prominent figures at the Alamo. William B. Travis, James Bowie, Davy Crockett, all defended the Alamo against Santana. But then later, uh, they gain more reinforcements. I think that comes in March 1st. So February 23rd is when the Mexican forces arrive or surround the Alamo. Um, and then February 24th, William B. Travis, who's the commander of the Texan force, he famously writes a letter addressed to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world. And this is the letter where he declares his commitment to defending the Alamo. And he famously states the quote, "I shall never surrender or retreat." So that's a pretty significant piece in this, because at that point, actually, when Santana shows up, they're given the opportunity to surrender and live, and and they actually fire a cannon in response to that. So then obviously, Santana's army raises I think it's the red flag, which is the no quarters flag, which basically means you're gonna die if we get you. Everybody's gonna die. So I think that sets this up a little bit. So that's February 23rd and 24th. But let me share my screen real quick. For those of you who are watching, we have a diagram of the Alamo. And this is pretty good stuff. This is actually really interesting. Jake shared this with us before the podcast. Okay, can you guys see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Cool.
perfect.
I'm going to zoom in a little bit there just to see if that helps. It wants me to sign in to Facebook, but I'm not going to do that. So this is a diagram of the Alamo. Now, we had said it was 4 acres, and obviously what everybody thinks of when they think of the Alamo is the picture that's actually behind us in all of our backgrounds, which is the chapel, which was built in 1757. And this is kind of the famous area. But to describe it for you listeners out there, I would it's what you think of when you think of a fort. It's a walled structure. It's pretty rectangular in shape. This area, for those of you who are watching this, that's kind of highlighted in purple right here. I think that's the original sort of mission, and then everything that was built around it was built for the fort. So this is a pretty significant area. And when you think of this in terms of 4 acres, that's a pretty big chunk of land here. So at all corners of this rectangle here, which is the main fort, you have cannons. The biggest cannon that they operated was this 18-pounder here in the bottom right-hand corner. And then sprinkled throughout, they have some other 8-pounders. They have a couple 12-pounders up on the walls of the right at the top of the chapel. There's probably, I think here, there's close to 20 cannons. Now, something very interesting here that was pointed out in the podcast we listened to is they have all these cannons, but in order to man all these cannons, you need a lot of people. The 18-pounder cannon requires 8 to 12 people to man, to load, to put back in place, to refire, all that. Obviously, the 6-pounders, the 12-pounders, and the 8-pounders might require a little less, but when you have this many cannons, actually, they say they probably would have needed to man the cannons and to have a fighting force around 700, at least 700 people, which is nowhere near what they had. Like we said, they started out with about 150. And then it grew a little bit because they got reinforcements. But not a lot here. As you can see down here, the town of Gonzales is about 76 miles east of here. So that's where the first sort of conflict started. Also, some pretty interesting things I'm just reading on this diagram here. If you look at this wall that sort of connects the square fort to the chapel, that is the palisade, and the palisade had a cannon on it, and this is where this would have been what is this, like the southeast wall by the chapel. That's actually where Davy Crockett was leading his men. Here in the south wall, close to the 6-pounder cannons, here is actually where Jim Bowie was killed. So there's some interesting things noted here. We can maybe share this in the footnotes of this podcast. But it's fairly interesting. So that's kind of a general layout. This is a pretty big space. You know, there's a total of about, I think, on March 1st, 1836, a group arrives to the Alamo, and it says here in my notes there's 300 reinforcements. I think that's 300 total with the reinforcements. I might have to double check on that. There's not many of them.
Yeah.
There's not many of them at all.
That's pretty significant too, knowing that they came in after Santa Anna had raised the blood red flags.
Exactly.
Like they knew that
they knew what they were
there
getting
was
into.
No way out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they kind of had to probably sneak into. I mean, this when we say this place was surrounded, like 4 acres surrounded. I mean, the Mexican force that surrounded it was quite literally surrounded. I forget the exact numbers. Jake, do you know how many Mexican troops there were? I would say it's close to like
I know
4.
there's a range, but it was like between 6 and 8,000. I'll double check.
Yeah, that's pretty
real
significant.
quick.
And if I remember right, the death toll, we'll get to this in a little bit. Obviously, everybody in the Alamo was killed. Except I think the women and children. I think the women and children were spared because there was also women and children in the Alamo as well. Families of the soldiers, or the men in the Alamo. But
sorry to cut you
oh
off.
yeah, no, you're good.
Context: it's between 1,800 and 6,000 Mexican soldiers. So I was a little overestimated, but that's a pretty wide range.
That is a wide range.
Tough
but
to
that's
know,
but still,
a
I
lot
mean,
more than 200.
I mean, even 1,600. We're talking,
8 to 1.
8 to 1. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously, they're dug into the Alamo here, but they're also surrounded. So, I mean, that's the only reason they were able to withstand that many troops for that long is because of the fortifications. But it's still, yeah, they're greatly outnumbered here. Yeah, so this is quite significant. If we're going on the timeline here, so March 1st, there's some reinforcements that arrive. But March 2nd, Texas, there's a delegate at the convention of 1836 at Washington on the Washington, and they formally declare Texas's independence from Mexico. So that's March 2nd. So this is like mid-battle, a little bit late. You figure you're already fighting. Santa Anna better know that they've already declared their independence from Mexico, but nevertheless they declare it mid-battle. On March 3rd, 1836. So the Texans appeal for aid. So Travis actually sends out couriers to seek reinforcement and supplies, basically to find out, there's nobody close enough. You're kind of out there, and so they're not able to get reinforcements. Obviously, guys, we're talking about like a couple weeks here. But these are kind of the important timeline notes here. On March 5th, obviously the Mexican forces launch a series of small skirmishes, and this is kind of where they test the Alamo's defenses. And I think one of the things that they realized is, even with all these cannons, they're still pretty the forces protecting the Alamo pretty undermanned. There was, when we're talking about the cannons here on both sides, there was two different types of shots. So there was, I forget exactly what they call it, but there was these cannon. They would shoot either just normal projectiles, or they would shoot these projectiles basically that would explode midair, and rain shrapnel down. I forget what they're called. They're called like oh shoot, it's gonna drive me nuts. I think it was like, I want to say it was something along the lines of a. Let's see here. I thought I had it in my notes. Anyways, so just kind of to give you an idea, like it was a pretty serious, like, I mean, this is a pretty intense battle, even before the walls were breached. But then on March 6th, before dawn, this is sort of the final assault. Santa Anna orders a final assault on the Alamo. The Mexican forces within like an hour have breached nearly all but one wall, and that one wall is actually that south. If we pull up that map here, let me pull up that map again. If we're looking at this this picture here, that palisade that was defended by Crockett, that's sort of the last wall that hasn't been breached. All the other walls have been breached. It's not looking good at this point. So all these other walls have been breached. It's hand-to-hand combat everywhere within the walls of the Alamo. Obviously, it go after. I mean, there's famous pictures. Let me see if I can actually find some. But you'll see these depictions of the Alamo fighting. You'll see the Texans firing down their muskets at the Mexican soldiers that are climbing the walls, trying to breach the walls. You'll see, and then the most famous pictures, I would say, are always the pictures of or the depictions of the hand-to-hand combat going on inside the walls. And those are kind of the really. Let me try to find a few. Pictures. There's obviously the famous one with Davy Crockett, but let's see here. Oh, this is the cool one. This is we won't get copyrighted if we give them a little credit. This is on the History Channel's website, folks. This is one of those famous pictures. So you've got the mission, the chapel, and then here you got the Mexican and the Texan forces going at it. There's Davy Crockett. He's at this point they're using their muskets as clubs because they're all out of ammo. You see guys with save their swords, bayonets. It's pretty much hand-to-hand combat at this point. Kind of those last moments at the Alamo. So it's a pretty brutal battle. Obviously, it ends, after this fierce resistance, with the defenders being overwhelmed. Alamo falls to Mexican forces, and everybody in there is obviously killed. I think the women. I'm not sure on the women and children because I know there was about 20 women and children in the Alamo. I think they were spared, probably. Not totally sure on that. Probably should know that, but no, all the defenders are obviously killed. Yeah. So that I mean, guys like Travis, Bowie, Crockett, all killed in battle. But what happens, obviously, with the end of this battle is that it creates even more of a battle cry for the Texan. Texan Revolution. So pretty awesome. And then obviously that's where the phrase "Remember the Alamo" comes from. So, and then if you guys want to read this book, Sam Houston, the Alamo Avengers, a couple weeks later, Texan forces led by Sam Houston go and defeat the Mexican army at the Battle of San Jacinto, I think's how you pronounce it. I could be pronouncing that wrong. It's a J word. It's Mexican, so I think it's huh. If I've learned anything from jalapeno,
Jalapeno.
I think it's San Jacinto. So obviously that's a pretty important battle after. That one actually Santa Anna's captured in that battle. I'm pretty sure he loses a leg, and then a treaty is signed recognizing Texas independence. So that's pretty important. So obviously, if you want a little bit of the story of the aftermath, I'm getting there in this book. I'm still kind of at the first half of it, but this book's good. Yeah, Sam Houston, the Alamo Adventures, pretty interesting stuff.
And I know Santa Anna, basically, that was an exchange for his life, right? That he
and they basically said you can go back.
Gave up Texas. So
they're like, you can go back to Mexico if you give us Texas.
That was how little conviction he had about his own cause.
he's like, I don't care. Just send me back there so I can trick them a bunch more. he's like, it'll take them a while before they send me to Cuba. Yeah. So the Battle of San Jacinto is actually fought on April 21st, 1836. So like when we're looking at that timeline, I mean, shoot, I mean, the Alamos fought in late February, early March, and by April 21st, they've essentially gained their independence. That's honestly pretty successful revolution right there.
Yeah.
Pretty successful. Pretty impressive.
So it's like less than a year.
That's got to be close to a record.
Yeah, I mean, I think officially they declared their independence March 2nd, and they gained it. I mean, recognizing the independence, the treaty that was signed was April 21st. So I mean, quite literally a little over a month. Like a month and a half. So I mean, pretty impressive. That's all I gotta say. Impressive. Pretty impressive. So that obviously led to the Republic of Texas. So with the signing of the treaties of Valesco's, I think they were called, Texas gained the de facto independence. Republic of Texas was established, and Sam Houston was appointed first president or elected first president of Texas. But overall, I think it's a really it's an amazing story, and for it to not even really be at that time directly tied to like American. Obviously, there's a lot of Americans there. I mean, Sam Houston's like right in Jackson's back pocket. He went down there to regain Texas, and he kind of did his job. But it's really interesting. It was for such a short period of time, and I know there was a lot of lead up to this, but it's a really complex like series of events that were driven by like a lot of cultural factors. You had all of the pushes. You had a lot of pushes from obviously the people of Mexico not liking you have all the things that were going on in the Mexican government with this great turnover, and then Santa Anna coming in, and then people not being happy with Santa Anna, and then Santa Anna becoming a dictator. You had all this influx of Americans into Texas. So a lot of like cultural, political, economic factors that all like led to this revolution that really didn't last that long, and it was very successful. And it's amazing because none of the other Mexican revolutions or the revolutions of any of the other Mexican territories were successful. So it's pretty awesome, and I think it seems like the perfect. I mean, like this is like kind of what sets Texas's destiny to be this like sort of independent, hard knock state once it does become an official part of the U.S. But to be their own republic too, I think it's cool at least that they were a republic at least a couple years, even if it
Mhm.
wasn't more than 10 years. I mean, it's still pretty darn cool.
Yeah, no other state could say that, I don't
No,
think.
exactly. Yeah. No, it's awesome. And like they fought for their own independence. Like there was no help from the American government here. I mean, you had some Americans fighting, but there was no like direct aid to
Right,
the Texas
right.
Revolution. So they're self-made. They get a they get a they get a they get a
They get a
there was
gold
no
star.
there was no handouts. But yeah, did I miss anything, guys? I feel like I ran
That was
through that pretty good.
pretty comprehensive. Yeah, I thought it
Yeah.
was.
I
I
think
thought
yeah,
covered all the main ones,
yeah,
main
I mean,
points.
I know the battle, like there's a lot more obviously there.
Mhm.
But I think the really fascinating thing here is all the lead up to the battle, to actually the revolution in general.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Because there's so many like different factors there. Like I said, like just in this, if you read this book alone, I mean, just studying Sam Houston and like kind of the cultural dialogue in the U.S. in regards to the Texas territory, all the things that were going on. And then I'm sure if you look on, I mean, dig in on the other end of it and look at, you know, all the Mexican people that were in the Texas territory that were unhappy with Santana. I'm sure there's a lot more there, or just unhappy with their government structure in general. Um, and what's really crazy to think is like Mexico wasn't even, I mean, Mexico fought their war for independence in what did we say it was? Was it
24,
1821? Did they gain independence?
21.
Mexican War of Independence was 1810 through 1821. So they gained independence in 1821. And then, 15 years later, they're having several more revolutions. Like what a tumultuous time in Mexican history too.
Yeah.
To like go through 20 presidents and then and then have, they just gained their independence, 20 presidents, they get a dictator, they have another revolution, and then really, I mean, then there's the Mexican American War. And that's something we obviously will probably get to here soon.
Mhm.
But then I mean the Mexican American War is really where we grab Texas for ourselves. Um so it's interesting time in history. This is one I feel like, I mean, I don't know if you guys agree with me. This is one I feel like that kind of it doesn't get pushed under the rug. I wouldn't say that. I feel like it isn't covered that in depth. I feel like it's a
Yeah.
lot of, I think this is a period in time that I think a lot of people, War of 1812, and then they're like, oh, and then the Civil War, and then they're like,
Hmm.
oh, wait, there was this. And I think part of it's because obviously you have the War of 1812. That's important, don't get me wrong. But you've got the Texas Revolution, which is its own sort of revolution, and it doesn't really get tied into American history until they become a part, like Texas history doesn't become part of American history or the American history books until they become a state, until they join the states, I should say. So I feel like that's a lot of times why it gets overlooked, but it's like very interesting to learn about all these different things that were going on because I mean, they're just as important in American history as everything else that was going on. Um, Obviously, if you look at the impact that it makes, if Texas doesn't get, and they probably would have gained their independence at some point, but like if they hadn't gained their independence, how long would they have stayed part of Mexico? Would it have led to a bigger war down a bigger version of the Mexican American War? So there's a lot of things there. Um, yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
this
Just
period of time.
watching the chain of events really is just pretty eye opening.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
Yeah. It,
just
it
seeing
may,
that impact. Like if you take that further, you were saying if they don't gain independence, we have a bigger Mexican
conflict.
American War. Then
Yeah.
maybe we don't even have a civil war then if we're all united
Sure.
against
Yeah.
Mexico. So
hmm Yeah, you
yeah,
never
yeah,
know. I
you
mean,
can go any number of ways with it.
yeah. Yeah, and yeah, I think I don't know. I'm sure people do study this, but it feels like this is overshadowed a lot by this time period, and the events that are going on out west are a little bit, or the southwest, I should say, are kind of overshadowed by the lead up to the Civil War a lot of times. Because I mean, at this point, we're like 1836 year, like full lead up to the Civil War in a lot of places. Like
Yeah.
the South's already really pissed off.
Mhm.
Like the South is
Yeah.
not happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. Um, yeah, I this was a great one. I mean, we'll see what we do for the next episode, obviously, but we might stay because this is an interesting point in American history. We may just, float in this time period for a while and check out some of
Yeah.
these other characters because I mean, like we've got like guys like Sam Houston, obviously Andrew Jackson's a pretty big part of this era too.
Yeah.
You've got guys like I mean, like even just following like Austin's journey to Texas and all that would be pretty interesting. There's a lot going on here. Obviously, I think we should cover the Mexican American War. There's a lot to be explored in this point of time, this area of American history. So we'll keep you guys posted on our next episode. But yeah, do you guys have any last thoughts?
I'm just gonna say I want to read the book now. You sold it.
Yeah.
You sold
It's
it
a
pretty
good
well.
book. Even if you don't read
Yeah.
it, honestly, as
Mhm.
long as they have a decent person reading it,
Yeah.
it's like it's written in a very
I did
maybe.
find it on Audible, so I got
Did
saved
you
on there.
find it on
Okay.
Audible? I'm
Yeah.
Yeah.
looking
I'll
to
check it
see if
out.
I'm looking to see if there was an excerpt that I could um it's written very it's not written like your normal historical book. It's written almost like a biography. It's different. It's different. Like this part, this little passage here. Sam Houston's fall from grace was far from President Jackson's only concern. While his protege was off drowning his sorrows with the Cherokee, Jackson worked hard to undo what he saw as one of the biggest mistakes of the previous occupant of the White House, John Quincy Adams. To put it bluntly, Jackson hated Adams. First of all, he hated him for having beaten him in the presidential election of 1824. Although Jackson won by the popular vote by a solid margin, he got less than the required majority of electoral votes. So that's just kind of like style writing there. Pretty easy to read, pretty
Yeah.
entertaining.
Pretty
Um,
smooth style. Yeah.
oh yeah, I did not mention this. Houston did live with the Cherokee for a while. He was I think he grew up, he was part of the Cherokee. He married a Cherokee Indian, I think. And then, he, after his whole debacle and his drinking, he kind of like he went and lived with a Cherokee and was just a drunk. and then Jackson pulled him out. To go to Texas. So it's pretty interesting. Now this is it's a good book for everybody that's listening. Brian Kilmeade. Sam Houston and the Alamo Adventures. Go check it out. But yeah, guys, that's all I have. That's what I have for this one. Great. I think it was an interesting
good.
episode. A lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool background, and yeah, I'm excited to start researching for the next one. I like the cadence that we got these going on because I felt like with this one, I actually did get to sit down and do a little bit more research and get into it a little bit more than some of our previous episodes. Not to say that our previous episodes were bad, but like really sit down and digest the material, put together the outline, and really get into it. And
Mhm.
it's a lot. You feel a lot more fulfilled like when you get in and you're like actually getting in and doing the research. So hopefully you guys, everybody that listened, enjoyed this episode. But if you,
I thought it was really fun. I mean, like,
yeah,
just it seems like you were saying it's totally right, where it's a forgotten part of the history.
Mm.
They're very pivotal,
Right,
very
yeah. Yeah, you look at I mean how it shaped America today, and it's extremely important. And you look at all these figures, like when you're starting to read these names, like you're like, there's Austin, there's Houston. You're like
Yeah.
you're like all these cities that you like you hear the names every single day,
Yeah.
but then you don't necessarily you know tie that name back to a historical figure. So
Right. Right.
it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to have that. So yeah, it was a good refresher on American history, as these episodes always are.
For sure.
So yeah. Well, if that's it, I'll close this out for tonight, guys. Thanks everybody for tuning into this week's conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I hope you guys enjoyed these Foundations of Freedom episodes. You know, we really enjoy doing the research for them. We like putting them out there, and hopefully now with this every 3 week cadence that we got here going with these shows, that we'll be putting out even more quality content for everybody. If you like this show and you wanna drop us a like, leave us a comment, leave us a review. I think we're up to 4 5-star comments on Spotify, or 5-star ratings on Spotify. So thank you to everybody that's left me and Jake and Tom a 5-star rating on Spotify. We appreciate it. And if this is your much appreciated. And if this is your first time listening to the show and you want to go find more, and you want more historical podcasts, you can go check out the rest of the Foundations of Freedom series that we've done. I think this is about our 14th episode. We've covered the Civil War. We've covered drinking, bourbon, the history of bourbon. So a little bit of everything. So pretty quality stuff. Go and check us out, Green Dragon Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, and True Social. The Green Dragon Pod on Rumble and Twitter. And you can listen to the show everywhere you go on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We are on both those platforms. So if you're not a Spotify user, don't worry. We've got you, Apple listeners. But yeah, until next time, be safe, fight for what you believe in, and most importantly, be a good American. God bless.